Do you believe that faith can be enough to face absolute evil? Alessandro Vieri, a young priest from Tuscany, dedicated himself to helping tormented souls, but never imagined he would be drawn into a dark secret hidden beneath the sacred facade of a convent. What he found at Santa Ines was far beyond what his faith could explain or endure. Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before diving into this story filled with chilling revelations, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps us keep uncovering the most hidden secrets for you. Ready to discover what lurks in the shadows? Alessandro Vieri's call to faith. Alessandro Vieri grew up surrounded by the simplicity of Tuscany's countryside, where his family lived off the land. Imagine growing up in such a place, with that idyllic vibe and the smell of wet earth after the rain. You can almost feel it from here. Faith was always a constant presence in his home, cultivated by his mother, a deeply devout woman. She saw God's hand in everything, the sunlight glistening on wheat fields, the wind blowing through the vineyards, and even in life's hardships. His father, a hard-working man, respected his wife's faith but remained more skeptical, focusing on daily struggles. Alessandro, however, felt there was something beyond the peaceful routine. Since childhood, Alessandro was different. While other boys ran through the fields, he spent hours in the small chapel of his village, fascinated by the colorful stained glass and the serene atmosphere. He didn't fully understand what he felt, but there was a call within him, something urging him to seek answers. At 17, during a nighttime mass, the parish priest's sermon on sacrifice struck a deep chord in his heart. That night, he decided to dedicate his life to faith, a decision that filled his mother with both pride and worry. At 18, Alessandro entered the seminary in Florence, where he faced a completely new world. The training was rigorous and challenging, both mentally and spiritually. He studied theology, church history, and ancient languages, while also confronting the loneliness and doubts that test even the most devout. Yet, Alessandro found solace in his natural ability to listen and empathize with others. He became the ideal confessor, someone who not only listened but genuinely embraced others' pain. Recognition from his superiors came quickly. His qualities drew attention, and he was soon recommended for more demanding missions. Alessandro felt he was finally fulfilling the purpose he had been called to. His first official mission as a priest was in a humble parish on the outskirts of Rome, where he faced poverty and human suffering firsthand. These experiences shaped his compassion and strengthened his faith. Alessandro lived a simple yet fulfilling routine. He devoted himself to helping people, offering advice, spiritual comfort, and the sacrament of confession. However, he never imagined his peaceful life would be disrupted by such an unexpected and dark calling. When a letter from the Vatican arrived, informing him that he had been chosen for a new mission, he had no idea he was about to enter one of the most terrifying chapters of his life. Though he accepted the task humbly, something within Alessandro warned him of what lay ahead. He didn't know what to expect, but trusted that his faith would guide him. As he set out for the convent of Santa Ines, he couldn't imagine his faith would be tested like never before. The first mission and the Vatican's summons after years serving in a humble Roman parish, Alessandro thought he had found his ultimate purpose. He lived to console the tormented souls who crossed his path. His name was known as that of a dedicated priest, someone who saw beyond surface-level confessions and truly cared for those who came to him. His life was tranquil until an unexpected summons arrived in a letter sealed with the Vatican's crest. The message was direct and formal, as one would expect from the Holy See. He was called to present himself to Cardinal Morelli, a commanding figure known for his strict discipline and unwavering devotion. During their meeting, the cardinal informed Alessandro of his new mission. He would be sent to the convent of Santa Ines to serve as the permanent confessor for the cloistered nuns. It was a direct request, and the cardinal's tone left no room for refusal. Alessandro accepted the assignment humbly, but a strange feeling accompanied him from the start. The gravity with which the cardinal spoke about the convent seemed to carry an unspoken weight. "The sisters need spiritual guidance and peace," the cardinal said, but his piercing gaze seemed to hold back something unsaid. Still, Alessandro trusted that his faith would be enough to face any challenges. The convent of Santa Ines was a place of strict seclusion, surrounded by high walls and enveloped in silence. And there's something about such places. They have a silence that speaks louder than any scream. Alessandro had never been to a place so isolated and serene, yet so laden with an indescribable aura. He was greeted by the Mother Superior, a woman with a penetrating gaze and calculated movements, who seemed to command the environment with natural authority. "Your presence is a blessing for us," she said, but her words did little to ease Alessandro's unease. In the first days, Alessandro dedicated himself to learning the sisters' routine and offering the sacrament of confession. He noticed the convent's strict discipline, but the sisters seemed at peace. However, something about how some avoided meeting his eyes or coming too close left him unsettled. He attributed it to the cloistered life and its introspective nature. Despite the apparent calm, Alessandro couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Small details began to catch his attention: the absolute silence at night, the furtive glances of some sisters, and how the Mother Superior changed the subject when he inquired about the convent's history. Alessandro was beginning to realize his mission at Santa Ines would be far more than providing spiritual guidance. Arrival at the convent of Santa Ines. The first sight of the convent of Santa Ines was striking. Hidden within the Vatican's walls, the building was made of ancient stone, with modest gardens and architecture that seemed more protective than welcoming. As Alessandro passed through the gates, he felt an inexplicable chill, as if entering a place that was not entirely sacred despite its religious nature. The Mother Superior greeted him with polished cordiality, but her tone carried something Alessandro couldn't immediately identify. "Here, we value silence and discipline," she said as she walked him through the convent's corridors. He felt the weight of her words, as if they were more than guidance, perhaps a warning. Her eyes seemed to probe his soul, searching for his intentions. The first days at the convent were spent adjusting. Alessandro spent most of his time in the chapel, reviewing sermons or hearing the sisters' confessions. The routine was meticulous: prayers at dawn, manual labor in the gardens, crafting religious ornaments during the day, followed by an evening mass. Yet Alessandro noticed the sisters rarely interacted outside of mandatory moments. One detail that caught his attention was the Mother Superior's insistence on extending confession hours. "They have many doubts and need your guidance," she explained, but Alessandro couldn't understand why such a devout convent seemed so restless. At first, the confessions were trivial, but some nuns began to report disturbing dreams and feelings of being watched. Among the confessions, Sister Clara's stood out the most. She spoke of shadows that seemed to take form in the corridors and a growing sense of unease at night. Alessandro tried to reassure her, explaining that isolation could cause such perceptions. Yet, he couldn't shake the intensity of her gaze as she spoke. Each day in the convent made Alessandro feel that more was hidden than visible. The initial serenity was giving way to a growing sense of oppression. The silence of the nights seemed heavier, and Alessandro began to feel that he was being watched by something he couldn't see. He didn't know that his journey into the unknown was just beginning. The first disturbing confessions in his first days at the convent, Alessandro believed that most of his work would involve hearing ordinary confessions, offering comfort, and strengthening the nuns' faith. At first, that was exactly what happened. The sisters confessed common spiritual doubts, concerns about their devotion, or minor sins that seemed grave due to their isolation. However, as weeks went by, the tone of the confessions began to change. One afternoon, Sister Clara entered the confessional. Her breathing was labored, and her once firm voice sounded hesitant. "Father Alessandro, I've been feeling something strange," she began. "At night, I feel as though something is watching me, something that shouldn't be there." Her words made Alessandro furrow his brow, but he attributed it to the loneliness that could affect the nuns' minds. He reassured her that God was always with her, but Sister Clara's words lingered in his thoughts. The reports became more frequent. Other sisters began mentioning disturbing dreams, where shadows took form or voices whispered incomprehensible words. Sister Beatriz, one of the younger nuns, confided that she had heard soft footsteps in her cell during the early hours, though no one was there when she lit her lamp. Alessandro started to notice a pattern. These stories didn't seem coincidental, but he still tried to find logical explanations for what he was hearing. Restlessness grew within the convent. During one confession, a sister mentioned seeing dark stains on the walls of her cell that vanished by morning. Another reported hearing muffled chants at night, coming from a place she couldn't identify. Alessandro began noticing that the nuns looked increasingly tired, with deep circles under their eyes and an air of apprehension that contrasted with the convent's disciplined routine. With each confession, Alessandro felt more pressure. He wanted to help the sisters, but knew that words of comfort alone weren't enough to address the fears they described. Even the serenity he usually found in the chapel felt threatened. During his nighttime prayers, he sensed an unsettling presence, as if he wasn't truly alone. The silence of the nights in the convent started to feel oppressive. Alessandro began to hear subtle noises, light footsteps, doors creaking in the distance, whispers he couldn't identify. Despite himself, he started to question his own rationality. The confessions had planted in his mind the idea that perhaps something truly was wrong in that place, something he couldn't explain. The first encounter with the dark presence one night, as Alessandro prayed in the chapel after evening prayers, a distant sound interrupted his prayers. It was soft but persistent, like slow, cautious footsteps. He lifted his head and looked around, but the chapel was empty. Gripped by a mix of curiosity and unease, he took a candle and followed the direction from which the sound seemed to come. The convent's hallways were shrouded in an eerie silence. Alessandro walked slowly, the candlelight flickering on the stone walls. He passed by the nuns' cell doors, all closed, and saw nothing out of place. However, as he approached the end of the hallway, a subtle movement caught his attention. A shadow seemed to glide along the wall, vanishing the moment he noticed it. For a moment, Alessandro froze. He tried to rationalize what he had seen, but something deep within told him that it wasn't a mere trick of the light. He moved closer to where the shadow had disappeared but found nothing. The hallway was empty, and the silence was almost deafening. Feeling an inexplicable chill, he decided to return to his cell, though the discomfort stayed with him throughout the night. In the following days, Alessandro tried to convince himself that what he had seen was a product of his imagination, perhaps influenced by the sisters' reports. Yet he couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched, especially at night. Even his faith, which had always been his stronghold, seemed unable to shield him from the growing sense of unease. The nuns' accounts began to weigh even more heavily on Alessandro. He realized that their dreams and visions seemed to align with his own experiences. He began to wonder if the convent's isolation might be affecting everyone, including him. But deep down, he knew the explanation wasn't that simple. The presence Alessandro had sensed that night marked the beginning of a new phase in his time at the convent. He understood that the sisters' confessions were not mere fantasies or exaggerations. There was something there, something dwelling in the shadows, and it seemed to be drawing closer. Alessandro didn't know what it was, but he was certain he was only beginning to grasp the extent of what awaited him. The diary of the former priest. One afternoon, while studying in the convent library, Alessandro found something that would change his view of the place. Hidden among old, dust-covered books was a worn leather diary. At first, he thought it was just another record of spiritual reflections, but as he flipped through it, he realized the pages contained something much darker. The diary belonged to a priest who had served at Santa Ines decades earlier. Initially, the entries spoke of the routine at the convent, the discipline of the sisters, and the spiritual challenges he faced. However, as Alessandro read on, the tone shifted. The priest's words became more urgent, filled with doubts and fears. He mentioned something that moved in the shadows and seemed to watch over the convent. One particular phrase caught Alessandro's attention. "Faith is not enough here." These words were underlined, as if the author wanted to emphasize their importance. The priest described disturbing dreams similar to those the sisters had been reporting and spoke of mysterious marks on the bodies of some nuns. "They bear the burden of what they do not understand," he wrote on one of the pages. Alessandro spent hours analyzing the diary. He found references to an event the priest called the Night of Shadows, but the details were vague, as if the author had deliberately avoided describing what had occurred. The tone of the final pages was one of despair. "If you are reading this, know that what is here does not belong to this world. Protect your soul, but know it will not be safe as long as you remain." When he finished reading, Alessandro felt a weight in his chest. The diary not only confirmed the fears that had been growing in his mind, but also revealed that what he was facing was not something new. He did not know who the priest who wrote those words was, but he felt that the man had tried to warn him about something far greater than either of them could comprehend. From that moment on, Alessandro decided he had to uncover the truth. He knew the convent harbored dark secrets, and that his presence there was not just to provide spiritual guidance to the nuns. He was in the midst of something much deeper and more terrifying, and now he was certain his faith would be tested like never before. The strange disappearances the days at Santa Ines grew increasingly heavy for Alessandro. The convent, which had once seemed serene, now emanated a growing tension. The nuns appeared visibly more weary, with deep dark circles under their eyes and a restlessness that showed even during prayers. Alessandro couldn't help but notice that some of them seemed to avoid eye contact, as if they carried a terrible secret they couldn't share. The first major absence was Sister Beatrice, a young nun who had reported disturbing dreams and inexplicable cold sensations in her cell. One morning, she simply didn't show up for morning prayers. When Alessandro questioned the Mother Superior, she replied coldly, Sister Beatrice was transferred for treatment. She was very fragile. The explanation seemed plausible, but the way it was delivered left Alessandro suspicious. A few days later, another sister disappeared, this time with no explanation given. Alessandro began to notice a pattern. The nuns who disappeared were the ones who showed the most signs of spiritual unrest or fear. He tried questioning the Mother Superior again, but was met with the same evasive response. Do not worry, Father. The sisters are being cared for. Focus on your prayers. The behavior of the other nuns changed as well. Conversations, once discreet but frequent, now barely happened. Silence reigned during meals and work hours. Alessandro felt that everyone was aware of the absences, but no one had the courage to speak of them. Whatever was happening, it was clear there was a pact of silence imposed by something, or someone. One night, as he prayed in the chapel, Alessandro heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. When he went to investigate, he found an open but empty cell. The bed was untouched, as if no one had slept there, and a faint metallic smell lingered in the air. He noticed a small dark stain on the floor that appeared to be blood, but before he could investigate further, he heard someone approaching and decided to retreat to his own cell. From that moment on, Alessandro knew something terrible was happening at Santa Ines. The Mother Superior's excuses could no longer hide the obvious. The nuns were disappearing, and this was not due to illness or transfers. He needed to uncover the truth, but he felt that each step toward the unknown brought him closer to danger. The encounter with the creature that night, Alessandro decided to stay awake until late, alert to any sound or movement. He hid in a dark corner of the main corridor, holding a small unlit oil lamp to avoid drawing attention. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of the convent's ancient wood. For hours, nothing happened, but just before dawn he heard something. It was a wet, repulsive sound like someone chewing flesh. The noise came from a nearby cell, and Alessandro approached cautiously. The door was ajar, and the metallic smell he had noticed before was now overwhelming. When he pushed the door open, the sight froze him in place. On the floor of the cell lay the lifeless body of Sister Helena, one of the youngest nuns. Over her was a grotesque, hunched figure. The creature had gray, mottled skin, so thin that its bones were visible. Its head was bowed, but when Alessandro entered, it lifted its face, revealing bloodshot eyes and long, sharp teeth covered in flesh and blood. Alessandro tried to react, but fear paralyzed him for a few seconds. Man, have you ever felt that fear that pins you to the spot? Like, you can't run, you can't scream, you can only feel. The creature let out a guttural growl that seemed to resonate in Alessandro's very chest and took a step toward him. It wasn't until he felt the weight of the crucifix in his hand that he managed to move. He raised it before him and began reciting prayers of protection with all the strength of his faith. The creature screamed, a sound that seemed to mix pain and fury, and retreated, covering its eyes as if the light from the crucifix burned it. Taking advantage of the moment, Alessandro stepped back, still holding the crucifix in its direction. Before he could attempt to stop it, the creature released Sister Helena's body and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, moving with terrifying speed. Alessandro fell to his knees beside Sister Helena's body, but it was already too late. She was dead, her face contorted in an expression of terror. He spent the rest of the night praying, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever was attacking the sisters was not human, and he needed to understand what was truly happening before it was too late for everyone. The discovery of the hidden church in the days that followed, Alessandro continued trying to piece together the mystery. The confessions of the nuns, the diary of the previous priest, and now the encounter with the creature all pointed to something far greater than he had imagined. During a solitary search for answers in the library, he came across a reference to an ancient chapel said to have been built beneath the convent, but abandoned centuries ago. Alessandro decided to investigate. And it's always like this, isn't it? Just when you think you've seen it all, curiosity comes along and pulls the rug out from under you. He followed what seemed to be a path indicated in the old records of the convent, arriving at a locked door at the end of a rarely used hallway. The wood was old, almost rotting, and he managed to force it open. On the other side, a stone staircase led downward, plunging into darkness. The descent was slow and silent, each step echoing like a sinister whisper. At the bottom, Alessandro found himself in a vast and oppressive space. It was a chapel, but unlike any he had ever seen. The walls were made of black stone, adorned with symbols he didn't recognize, and at the center was an altar illuminated by flames that burned red, almost supernaturally. Around the altar, a group of hooded figures was gathered, chanting in a language Alessandro couldn't understand. On the center of the altar, lying as if offered up, was the body of the Mother Superior, covered in symbols drawn in blood. Alessandro felt the urge to scream, but knew he would be discovered if he did. The leader of the group began to speak, explaining the dark purpose of the ritual. He revealed that the nuns were used as sacrifices to uphold an ancient pact, and that the Vatican was aware of and protected the secret. Alessandro listened in horror as the hooded figures discussed how to manipulate the situation to keep the cycle of sacrifices hidden. Terrified, Alessandro tried to retreat, but accidentally bumped into a column. The sound echoed through the chapel, drawing the hooded figure's attention. "Who's there?" shouted the leader. Alessandro ran back to the staircase, the footsteps of his pursuers echoing behind him. He managed to escape, but knew he was now marked as a target by those guarding the Dark Pact. The revelation of the Dark Pact back in his cell, Alessandro felt the weight of the revelations he had just witnessed. What was happening at Santa Ines wasn't merely the work of an isolated evil entity, but an ancient pact kept secret by the Vatican itself. The leader's words echoed in his mind. The nuns were deliberately offered as sacrifices to sustain a dark power. He couldn't fathom how such a revered institution could be involved in something so macabre. Alessandro had always believed in the Vatican as a symbol of purity and faith. Now his faith was shattered. He wondered how many other convents might be involved in similar pacts. How many lives had been sacrificed in the name of this dark secret? In the days that followed, Alessandro tried to act normally to avoid suspicion, but he felt he was being watched. He noticed that the new Mother Superior, sent to replace the previous one, was an enigmatic and authoritarian figure. Her words were cold, and her presence seemed to linger like a shadow over the convent. It didn't take long for Alessandro to realize she knew exactly what was happening there. The remaining nuns were more despondent than ever. Some even avoided leaving their cells. What Alessandro had witnessed in the hidden church led him to understand that the disappearance of the sisters was an essential part of the pact. With each sacrifice, the ritual's power was maintained, feeding a force he still didn't fully comprehend. Alessandro knew he had to do something, but fear consumed him. He considered writing to the Vatican to report what he had discovered, but quickly dismissed the idea. If the Vatican was involved, any attempt to report the truth could put him in even greater danger. He was completely alone, surrounded by invisible enemies. The weight of the truth began to corrode his faith. Alessandro no longer knew if he was praying to a God who would truly protect him, or to an entity that allowed such horrors to occur. He needed to make a decision, expose the secrets of Santa Ines, even if it cost him his life, or flee to save his own soul, abandoning the sisters who were still alive. The escape and threats the night after his discovery, Alessandro decided he could no longer remain at the convent. He knew that if he stayed, he would end up disappearing like the other nuns. His suspicions that he was being watched only heightened his paranoia, and he realized he had to act quickly. He packed his essential belongings and hid the previous priest's diary among his clothes. Before dawn, Alessandro left the convent without telling anyone. He knew the Mother Superior would quickly notice his absence, but he was determined to put as much distance as possible between himself and that place. As he walked the streets of Rome, he felt the weight of the secret he carried. He needed to decide what to do with the information he held. Upon arriving at his mother's house, he was greeted warmly, but couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth about what had happened. He simply said that his mission at the convent had ended. In the days that followed, he tried to resume his routine, but the images of what he had witnessed at the convent haunted him. He woke up every night in the throes of nightmares, drenched in sweat and with his heart racing. One night, while having dinner with his mother, he heard a sound at the door. Upon opening it, he found only an envelope carefully placed on the ground. Inside was a note with a brief and terrifying message. "We know where you are. Don't say a word." Alessandro felt his blood run cold. He now understood that he wasn't just fleeing the shadow of Santa Ines, but also the relentless vigilance of the Vatican. In the following days, Alessandro realized he couldn't stay in one place. He packed a small bag and left, giving his mother an excuse that he needed time to reflect. Deep down, he knew he was embarking on a one-way journey, carrying a burden that no one else seemed willing to share. In every city he stopped in, Alessandro found ways to share his story, even though many ridiculed him. He knew the dangers were real, but the idea of staying silent was more frightening than any threat. He had become a fugitive, but also a lone voice striving to shed light on the dark secrets of the Vatican. The decision to expose the truth of Alessandro's flight became a personal crusade. He knew that, even without concrete evidence, his story could open others' eyes to the horrors occurring in places like Santa Ines. He began recording everything he remembered in notebooks and recordings, detailing every event, every confession, and every revelation he had witnessed. During his travels, Alessandro encountered people willing to listen. Some believed him and shared stories of disappearances or inexplicable events in other convents and churches. These coincidences strengthened his resolve to expose the truth, even though he was challenging one of the most powerful institutions in the world. The diary of the previous priest became a central piece in his crusade. He presented it as evidence of what was happening in Santa Ines, but he knew it was insufficient to convince most people. Alessandro desperately searched for other documents or witnesses to corroborate his story. However, every attempt seemed to be intercepted by unseen forces. The threats continued. Anonymous envelopes appeared in his hotel rooms. And this is where things get truly tense. When they start playing hide and seek with your sanity. And he often had the feeling of being followed. Despite the fear, Alessandro refused to give up. He knew that as long as he kept running, the secrets of Santa Ines would remain buried, but his fight was also a way to honor the sacrificed sisters. His faith, though shaken, had not entirely disappeared. Alessandro now prayed for strength and courage, not just for himself, but for all the victims of the Dark Pact. He knew his chances of success were slim, but he also believed that the truth, once revealed, could be the most powerful weapon against the darkness. Alessandro became a ghost, moving between cities and countries, always one step ahead of his pursuers. He understood that his life would never be normal again, but he accepted this fate with resignation. His only hope was that, one day, people would believe his story, and that the secrets of Santa Ines would finally be exposed to the world. The story of Alessandro Vieri is a journey of faith, terror, and the struggle to bring humanity's darkest secrets to light. What happened at Santa Ines may never be fully revealed, but what Alessandro discovered changed his life forever and left an indelible mark on the world around him. This story is just one piece, and one day, perhaps we'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries. Good night. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this mystery captivated you. But I bet you haven't seen everything yet. Click on the next videos now to continue your journey into the unknown. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next secrets I'm about to reveal. But be careful. Once you step inside, there's no turning back.